I was streaming a couple days ago, and a viewer actually brought up a good point to me. He asked me which Sonic games I'd like to see remastered and what's a candidate for being remastered, etc. There's a reason why this is actually interesting to talk about, and that's because the head of Sonic team, Takashi Iizuka himself, has said that the team is up for more remasters. As you know, over the last couple of years, we've gotten Sonic Colors Ultimate. We have the current game that's dropping in just a couple of months, Sonic and Shadow Generations, which comes with a remake of Generations, but also a new game at the same time. And we also just recently got Sonic Origins and Sonic Origins Plus. Sega, for the last like 2 or 3 years, has been saying if Sonic sales are doing well, we're going to remaster and remake more games. This is something they've been saying for a while. But here's the current statement of what Takashi Iizuka had to say about Sonic remasters, which brings up this discussion. He says, when we remastered Sonic Colors, there was Sonic Colors Ultimate, we wanted to think about what we can bring next as a remaster title. At that time, Sonic Generation was kind of what everyone was really excited about. I don't know who was excited about it, but we'll keep going. What they really wanted and what they were really hungry for. That's why we chose to do Generations, and we added a Shadow portion. Depending on what people like out there, if there's a title people like, we'll think about it for the next remaster. The first thing we should do before we get into the most unlikely and likely Sonic remasters is give you a very, very brief history of Sonic remasters and remakes. When it comes to Sonic remakes, remasters, and even re-releases / ports, the first thing you could probably point to is Sonic Jam. There's been some other one-off re-releases, but this was like a full-blown Sonic team release that had like a little 3D hub world. That was one of the first true experimentations of 3D Sonic, but the game also included re-releases of Sonic 1, 2, 3, and Knuckles with minor graphical enhancements. As a matter of fact, when you talk about Sonic remakes, remasters, re-releases, one of the only things you could realistically point to is the classic games. These things have been ported and re-released like 100,000 times. You had the Sonic Mega Collection from 2002, which featured several classic Sonic games in addition to the original trilogy. The Sonic Gems Collection had some other games like Sonic the Fighter, Sonic CD, Sonic R, then like some of the Game Gear games. So at this point, they were kind of re-releasing their entire catalog for more modern home consoles and third-party platforms. So while most remasters, remakes, re-releases, whatever you want to call them, for Sonic games were basically just classic Sonic ports, the first 3D Sonic game to get a re-release or port or enhanced version was actually Sonic Adventure 2 Battle for the GameCube. This was, of course, not too long after the original Sega Dreamcast went under and Sega stopped making consoles. Here's a common theme, though. While there were some advanced features in this, it's widely considered to be a worse version of the original Dreamcast version, and the same can be said for one of the other only 3D Sonic re-releases or remakes or remasters, which was Sonic Adventure DX, which again, a lot of people considered this version to be inferior to the original Dreamcast version. This definitely made way more drastic changes, and you could consider this a full-blown remaster. It was re-released a couple of times, but was basically like the deep fried meme where it gets worse and worse with each re-release because they did it on the PC, they ported it to the Xbox, they ported it to Steam, and it got worse every time. But other than that, mainly it's classic Sonic games getting remastered. We also got a port of Sonic 1, the Game Boy Advance, and believe it or not, this was actually one of the worst Sonic games ever. Some people even consider this to be worse than Sonic 06. In many ways, it made the game more inferior, and the fact that you can barely see the screen is a huge problem. But they did add the spin dash to it, at least. Yeah, right? I mean, that's good. We got the Sonic Classic Collection, which was released for the Nintendo DS back in 2010, which actually included Sonic 3. For the first time in a long time, like a lot of people will point out that Sonic 3 was a little bit less accessible than some of the other classic Sonic games, but they did do this. But the best versions of the classic Sonic re-releases that they ever did were the Christian Whitehead mobile ports. They did Sonic 1, they did Sonic 2, they did Sonic CD. When you think about like some of the best ways to play this game officially, these have to be it, with the widescreen support, beautiful graphics, QOL changes. These were certainly a bright spot in a pretty rocky history of Sonic re-releases. Sonic Lost World got a re-release in 2015, which was good because it was basically stuck on a dead and dying platform in the Wii U. So it was cool that other fans were able to actually access this game, despite the fact that I really don't like it that much. So maybe other games in the Sonic franchise, like Sonic Unleashed, could get this treatment in the future, but we'll talk about that later. Fast forward a couple of years later, we got Sonic Colors Ultimate, which seemed to be a good idea at the time because Sonic Colors is a very beloved Sonic game. Like, it's one of the highest rated 3D Sonic games of all time. So they kind of wanted to release something after the movie that they thought would be incontroversial, that like most Sonic fans would enjoy. The only problem is the remaster got pretty botched by the third-party studio that released it. Was it their fault? Was it Sega's fault? I don't really know. I don't want to get into the details. But tons of graphical issues and glitches really left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouth. The next year, we got Sonic Origins, which was released in 2020, and we got Sonic Origins Plus in 2023. This was supposed to be the definitive way to play the classic games, but again, there was a lot of fan discourse about these games, and certain things that they didn't like about it, like some of the soundtracks, some of the glitches, some of the bugs, some of the features that were available considering the fact that it was like $40. Also, the weird DLC. They gave the DLC for free to new players, but players that purchased the original game had to pay extra. There's a lot of fan issues with it. If you want to look it up, you can go look it up. Personally, I didn't really hate the game. Most recently, we also got a Sonic Mania port to mobile from Netflix Games. Once again, this was an inferior way to play the original game. They removed some features from the original Sonic Mania, like the time trial mode. The touch controls also were not that great, and there's a bunch of other issues. Like I said before, it's like an inferior way to play the game. We're not going to get into that completely, but again, it's just another botched re-release slash port. Fast forward to the current day and age, we are now in the era of Sonic and Shadow Generations, which is going to be coming in a couple of months. So next Sonic remaster is on the way, and the question in everybody's head is like, are they going to get this one right? They have a rocky history with this stuff. Obviously, I missed a couple ones before, but I kind of gave you the general brief history of it. So in addition to this game, the question is, what other games are extremely likely candidates for remasters, remakes, ports, whatever the case may be? Well, let's get into it.
What goes up must come down. Yeah, my feet don't touch the ground.
Let's start with a game that had a lot of buzz and heat with respect to getting a remake or remaster, and that is Sonic Heroes. Out of all games listed, this game actually is ripe for that type of treatment, and the reason why is that it's a pretty decently received Sonic game. It's got its critics for sure, but compared to a lot of 3D Sonic games out there, it's actually one of the higher rated 3D Sonic games. This game is a prime candidate for something like a remaster, in my opinion. I think that the game looks decent and good enough. It has this very vibrant and cartoonish aesthetic that is very true to the original Sonic design from the 90s, just in 3D. The visuals to this day actually hold up pretty well due to its art style. I think almost in a way, it holds up better than the adventure games. As you all know, there was huge buzz a couple of months ago about Sonic Heroes not getting a remaster, but a full-blown remake. Now, I think this has since been debunked, or at least deconfirmed, but regardless, it does bring up an interesting discussion. There's allegedly some issues with doing a full-blown remaster of this game and just porting it, because I believe the engine that the game runs on, Sega no longer has access to, or there's some licensing issues with it. I believe with EA, now you could fact check me if I'm wrong on this, but that could be a potential obstacle for this game getting just a straight up remaster, which it could use. I mean, you could simply just port this game over to modern platforms. That's why when the rumors were going around about Sonic Heroes getting a remake, they were talking about it being developed in Unreal Engine 5, which Sega is hiring developers for, so keep that in mind. The reason why this game would work is because it's actually the least accessible out of every single game that we will list off on this list. This game is stuck on 2004 hardware, and for the most part has not really been made accessible since. Maybe there was like a virtual console release on the Wii or something that I didn't know about, so don't actually me in the comments, but yeah, you get the point. So there is some problems though, because the game is a little bit divisive. You know, you don't want Sega to release games that could potentially get low critic scores, so they would probably have to fix a couple things. In particular, some of the things that people don't like about the game is the fact that the speed characters have some slippery control, so maybe a quality of life improvement to the collision or whatever, the movement of the game for the speed characters could be something that works. Maybe that's something they'd have to address in a full-blown remake of the game. I don't know how this works, okay? Another thing that people often criticize about this game is the fact that in order to actually beat it, you have to play it 4 times in a row with very minimal changes to the level, so you're basically doing the same thing over and over and over again. So people really don't like that. So perhaps some QL will have to address this. Like I said before though, one of the biggest things is that the game isn't even accessible via like backwards compatibility like some other Sonic titles we'll mention on this list. It's not available on Nintendo Switch hardware, which is kind of like the #1 platform for Sonic games currently. So this game, if they remastered or remade it, would definitely have an audience, and due to how inaccessible it is, I think it's certainly a prime candidate for something like this. Could you just potentially port this and upscale the textures, put it in HD? I think they can get away with that. If they were able to actually use the engine and just actually polish up the game, like remove some glitches, make sure that the collision's okay, it would probably work. I mean, you just run into the issue of the fact that critics may or may not like the game due to how divisive it can be for some people. However, if you don't have access to the engine and you need to use something else, I think a ground up remake actually makes sense for this game. I don't think it's the #1 deserving Sonic game of a full-blown remake. We'll get into that. Let's move on to the next one. One of the most popular games on this list with huge growing calls for a remaster or remake is definitely Sonic Unleashed. This game over the years has experienced one of the best rehabilitations I've ever seen for a Sonic game. When it was first released, this game had extremely middling reception. You got these dog water reviews from gaming outlets like IGN that just didn't really understand the magic and charm of it. After Sonic 06 flopped commercially, we officially abandoned the adventure formula for 3D Sonic games, and we now move towards the boosting formula, which was first utilized in Sonic Rush. While the critics may have not liked this game, the fans certainly love it, and it's probably due to the divisive nature of the Hedgehog, which is this button mashy combat system, although it's pretty in-depth if you compare it to any other Sonic game. Fans of this game will say that the combat in this game is actually significantly better than Sonic Frontiers. Regardless, the day stages in the game and the boosting is probably the least divisive, since it's been the franchise's formula for a long time, and I personally think that this was the best way the boost was ever utilized. But the issue of the Hedgehog is something that probably could scare Sega from doing a full-blown like remake or remaster of the game in general, but that's beside the point. In my opinion, I think this game is actually ripe for just like a port to PC, like straight up. Like, we need this game on PC. But in reality, this game does not need a remake. It just simply needs a remaster. To this day, it's still one of the best looking Sonic games, if not the best looking Sonic game. All you would simply need to do is upscale some of the textures, make it run in consistent 60 frames per second on all platforms, not just Xbox, because this game actually did get a 60 FPS patch for the Xbox Series S and X. But you can still see the graininess of the texture, so yeah, quick little upscale would do this game justice. You wouldn't really have to do much, right? It would be an easy remaster for Sega. A lot of people would want it. I would argue that even more so than Generations, people have been clamoring for this. This game definitely deserves some type of a remaster. I feel like the critics should give this game one more chance. I'm really kind of split on this. I'm like, does this game deserve a remaster? Maybe, but also a PC port to Steam or something like that would make a lot of sense. It's just that the game is somewhat available. With that 60 FPS patch, it really does change the game, but also at the same time, like I said, the middling reception that the game got when it first came out makes me think that they may think twice about remastering a game like that, because that could be a handicap, and you know that they're very much paying attention towards the critic scores. So I don't know, you guys let me know down below in the comments. You think it's likely it'll get a remaster? Do you think it's likely it'll just get a port to PC? At some point in the future, one or the other will happen. Let's move on to the next game now. All right, people, time to get to the elephant in the room. Full-blown remakes of the Sonic Adventure games. I'm going to be extremely biased here. These are my two favorite Sonic games of all time. Believe it or not, my inspiration for Sonic 2 being in the first place was when rumors of these games getting a remake or a remaster was extremely heavy back in like 2020. So with respect to the conversation of does this game deserve a remaster, does it deserve a remake, I believe that these games deserve full-blown, ground-up modern remakes. What do I mean by this? We need something like the Crash Bandicoot trilogy. They did a modern remake of this game. It looked absolutely incredible, and by the way, it also sold a lot of copies. There's clearly demand and appetite for games like this. You know, it just feels like they don't make games the way they used to, am I right? So this is the treatment I'd like for the adventure games, primarily due to the fact that these games are relatively accessible. They have full-blown Steam ports of this game. They re-release it for the PS3 and Xbox 360, which I believe is available via backwards compatibility. Like, I can still play this on my Xbox right now. Sonic Adventure got the Adventure DX treatment. Sonic Adventure 2 got the Battle treatment. Like, we have 2010 re-releases of these games. I don't really want to see this game in its current state anymore. I want to see something evolve to the next level, and I think that's what Sega wants to do as well. Takashi Iizuka himself said that Sonic Adventure 2 is his favorite Sonic game, so I think that Sega would really want to make sure that they get these games right. They wouldn't want to potentially ruin the legacy of these games. There's also aspects of both of these games that, you know, didn't age well. In particular, you look at the cutscenes with the voice acting. The cutscenes definitely did not age that well.
Watch out! You're gonna crash! Ah!
As much as I love the original voice cast of these games, and I actually would prefer them, I would probably want to bring in the modern cast to redo all the voices, because if you look at the voice acting of this game, fun fact, when they recorded this, I think most of the actors didn't even see the game. Like, they were just blindly recording lines. The animation doesn't really fit, so you probably would have to get new voice lines in this in order to make the cutscenes match the tone and emotion of the voice acting. Or maybe bring back the old voice cast. I don't know if they'd be able to do that. Some people, obviously, they wouldn't be able to. But also, with respect to the gameplay, there are some things that haven't aged well. Now, I think the Sonic gameplay, I think in terms of his controls, are actually the best they've been in the series for the most part. But you look at things like the camera, some of the wonky collision in the games, there's certainly some QOL and polishing that could be touched up with a modern remake. I just would like to see this game given the crash treatment. Both games, they're super important to Sonic's legacy, so Sega would have to first show us that they can even get a 3D remaster slash remake done right in the first place, because you look at Colors, it was kind of a disaster. Origins had some level of middling reception amongst the fans, so we're going to put this to the test with Generations. Hopefully that's successful, and hopefully it opens up the door for the adventure games to get remade, but I know someone like Takashi Iizuka would certainly want that to be done justice and done correctly. So it's a long way out, but before the Sonic franchise ends, between now and the next 30 years, we will see some type of remake for the adventure games. It's not going to be a remaster. They're doing a full-blown remake, and obviously they would need to get this on Nintendo consoles as well. That's what I think is most likely. I mean, there was rumors that they were going to do this back in like 2015. I mean, it's not confirmed, but like, they know that we want it. I think they just got to get it perfect. I expect nothing less than a full-blown remake. I mean, look at the Mystic Ruins right here. Imagine this on a modern game. Like, it would just look so good. Well, let's move on to the honorable mentions, because there's still some other stuff out there. So for this segment of the video, we're going to talk about games that are honorable mentions. Games that sometimes in the comment sections you'll see people asking for. We will go less in depth, but we'll talk briefly about the likeliness of some of these games getting remastered, remade, ported, whatever the case may be. Let's talk about a game that I see a lot of people in my comment section ask for, is a Sonic 06 remaster. I'm going to say that this will never happen. This is one of the most infamous Sonic games of all time, and it did generational setbacks to the Sonic franchise's reputation. While personally, I have a lot of fondness for this game. I grew up playing it and I genuinely enjoyed it. It felt like the true Sonic Adventure 3. It's well documented that this was a rushed out and poorly made product, full of bugs, glitches, bad loading screen times, weird romance elements in the story. I'm not going to go through everything. There's obviously well documented issues with this game. Now, Project 06, which is a fan remake of Sonic 06, definitely demonstrates that this game should have been the greatest Sonic game of all time with certain polish and tweaks to the game. There's no denying the fact that this game was an absolute meme and a disaster for Sega, so they probably want nothing to do with it. As a personal fan of this game, yes, I would love to see it, but from a business perspective, it's extremely risky to do something like this, so I'm gonna go with this is never happening. Let's move on to the next game. Another popular choice that a lot of people have for some type of remaster, remake, or re-release would be the Sonic Advance games. As far as official releases goes, this game is even less accessible than Sonic Heroes. Of course, you could play this on a web browser emulator extremely easily, but the fact of the matter is, as far as official releases goes, this game is stuck on the Game Boy Advance. A lot of people love these games because they have fond memories growing up with them. They're also one of the few 2D modern Sonic games, if that makes sense. The fact that they're exclusive to Nintendo platforms leads me to believe that a remake or remaster of this game is highly unlikely, especially when you consider wanting to push it to all platforms. But one thing I think is likely, potentially in the future, is these games coming to the Nintendo Switch online service. Like, if I had to go remaster, remake, or this would probably be the most likely option. Will Sega do it? That remains to be seen, but if we ever see new ways to play these games, my money would be on them coming to the Nintendo Switch online service. Would be super easy, and you can access the multiplayer features using the online service as well. So it's actually the most likely candidate. I'm going to talk about this super briefly. The storybook games, Sonic and the Secret Ring, Sonic and the Black Knight, I think these have no chance to come to modern platforms either, due to the fact that they were received poorly, one, and two, they were designed for the Wii with the janky motion controls. Figured I'd speak on this briefly just in case people don't understand, but I think it's pretty self-evident why they won't touch these games either. Last but not least, we have Sonic Rush and Sonic Rush Adventure. These are two games that I also believe are highly unlikely to get any form of remaster or remake. Obviously, people would want it, but there are some challenges with porting these games. In particular, the fact that they're made for the Nintendo DS with the weird two-screen system would make it quite difficult for them to port this game accurately. I mean, obviously it can be done, but with the dual screen system and the weird resolution that they would have to put the game in, means they would have to completely full-blown remake the game. So my opinion, I find it highly unlikely that this will happen.